Hello again from the Cambridge Biomedical Campus Wellness Campaign. As some of you already know, I'm Jill Wilson, and wherever you are in the world today, welcome. We know that the desire and the need for wellness is universal, and these webinars are not just for the 20,000 plus people working on the Cambridge Biomedical Campus. They're for everyone, so please feel free to share any links far and wide. Today, I have great pleasure again in introducing Anne Strether. Now, Anne's a trainer with Cambridgeshire, Peterborough and South Lincolnshire Mind, which is our local mental health charity. She's a qualified teacher and she's delivered training and managed and governed charities with a mental health focus in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough over 30 years. And she's also worked in the fields of visual impairment, HIV and child bereavement, as well as being a Samaritan's volunteer and trainer in the past. Now, please put any questions as you think of them in the Q&A, and Anne will attempt to answer some of them after the presentation. So with no further ado, I will hand over to her. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you very much, Jill. And I'd like to say a very warm welcome from me as well to you all for joining today's session on coping with worries. And it's absolutely lovely that you're all here. I'd like to say a very big thank you to Cambridge Biomedical Campus for inviting me, and particularly to Jill for arranging today's session. So thank you. I'd like to just now share my screen and to call up a presentation to share with you. So today, as I say, the session today is coping with worries, something that we all have, and we all have many worries, I'm sure, at any time. So I'd like to just briefly introduce the course and also CPSL Mind, but I'd like to just say first that I'm very conscious, I'm sure you've all had very busy mornings, and you sometimes, if you're very busy and then suddenly you take a little time to think about your own mental health and well-being, sometimes it can catch up with you unexpectedly in ways that you hadn't anticipated. So really just to say, please sort of take care with your own well-being. And if you need to take a bit of time, obviously, to go away or come back, just be aware of that. And Jill will put my email address up in the chat box at the end of the session as well. So please don't hesitate to contact me if that would be helpful, and I'd be glad to hear from you. So thank you very much. So as I say, a very warm welcome, and that was just an introduction to CPSL Mind and then the course. So as an organisation, we do two things really. We help people maintain and care for their mental health and well-being, and that's in large part why we're here today, and we support them also on the road to recovery, whatever that means for them. And we campaign against the stigma that is still there around mental health, and in large part around by talking about it. And again, we're so grateful for you being here. So we are an independent charity, but we're part of the Local Mind network as well. And these are just some of the services that we provide, and we care for people in crisis, people maintaining their mental health, both individually and in groups as well. So these are the things that I would love to share with you today. So first of all, we're going to understand what we mean by worry. So if we're going to address it, we need to understand what worry is and how and when it can become a problem for us. And critically to that understanding is knowing the difference between worry, stress and anxiety. They are different, and I think understanding them perhaps a little more can help us address them. In order to do that, there is a range of lovely tools that can just help us think about the worries we have and how we manage them. One of the ways critically in which we know that worry affects us is when we're asleep or indeed not asleep. And I think lying awake and worrying is something that we're all familiar with. So I just want to touch on sleep as well. And then some of the many ways and lovely resources there are for support. So that's what I'd like to look at today. So first of all, as I said, it'd be lovely just to sort of share with you the difference between worry, stress and anxiety. They are different and affect us differently, and understanding that can be really extremely helpful. So thinking initially just about what worry itself is. So the Cambridge Dictionary defines it as a feeling of being unhappy and frightened about something. And that seems to be, in a nutshell, really, in that it's something that's kind of affecting us sort of negatively, and perhaps if it can help sort of address that feeling of unhappiness and fear, then that can only be a good thing. This Merriam-Webster dictionary goes on to define it a little more closely, that mental distress or agitation, so this is worry, resulting from concern, but usually for something impending or anticipated. So this is where we're looking at. So worry is something that's going to happen in the future, and that's what we are concerned about. So thank you very much. There we are, sort of set the scene a little bit about what we're looking at today and what worry is, and then the need to address it. What I'd like to do just for a moment is to stop sharing and to ask whether, just to set the scene a little bit more, whether you could just enter in the chat box some of the things that are causing perhaps yourselves worry, or things that are likely to cause worry to ourselves more widely and other people. So if you're happy just to put in the chat box, that would be really sort of lovely context. What are the things that as people cause us worry? And particularly at the moment. Our health, definitely, of course. Finances, children, work, absolutely. Our lives and our work around us, and the finances in the sort of crisis that we have. Our elderly parents that we're caring for, and quite often are a kind of worry with us all the time. So here we have it: health, our work, our money, family issues. Our children and their safety, and that's about our bigger parent worry lives with us. Friendships and relationships, exactly. And our pets, very much so. They're really important to us, really important to all of us, and worry about them. And the future, absolutely, the security, financial and other security. And again, it's something in the future, isn't it? Absolutely, blood results. So it's our health and how that might affect us, and difficult sort of family issues. So sort of critical and causing us worry. And the fears and phobias that we have, and those can arise from so many things and live with us. Our voluntary responsibilities, absolutely, the communities in which we live, and one's parents, again, very, very sort of common form of the source of worry. And the responsibility that we live with, the responsibilities we have, and the responsibilities for others. And we do absolutely have the habit of worrying, and it's very difficult to get out of those thinking, and we just sort of touched on that later. And the same thing, worrying for the sake of worrying, because we're sort of caring, responsible people, and therefore worrying about the issues and the things, the people we care about, things we're responsible for, is something as kind of caring people that we will be worrying about. So thank you so much indeed for all of those. That's absolutely kind of fantastic context of just bringing us together for all the things that we live with and the things that we worry about. So thank you so much. Lovely. So I'll just now come back to sharing the screen. And so those are the sort of definitions of worry, and the things that we're worrying about you've set in place so kind of beautifully. So what I'd like to do now is just to look at worry, stress and anxiety, but we'll start with worry as the key one for today. And actually worry, we can always break that down a little bit further, and that worry and rumination come together. They're forms of thinking. They may cause us concern. But worry is concerned with the possibility of threats in the future, really. So what if this happens? What if such and such happens? All those things that you listed. What if that should happen? And then if it does happen, what will that cause? What will that lead to? So if this happens, then that might happen. And if that happens, and so on. So worry is concerned with the possibility of what things we're concerned about in the future. Whereas rumination, we can kind of identify, it's concerned more with things that have happened in the past, and that you'll worry about what you've done, perhaps what you might have said, what other people you care about might have done or said. So rumination concerning with the past, but both of us can have a real impact on our concentration, on the present, our energy levels, and really how we focus on the present and the things that we need to do at the present time. So thinking about worry, stress and anxiety and understanding the difference can be very helpful. So worry is actually a cognitive process. So this is our thoughts and our thinking, whereas anxiety, which can lead from worry, and stress are usually felt physically as well, sort of throughout our bodies. But worry is a thinking process. So stress, and we're just going to go on to think a bit more about that, that's a normal evolutionary, physical and emotional reaction when we feel overwhelmed by our worries. So if we're overwhelmed, all these worries that you mentioned are overwhelming us, then we may feel stress, and those are the reaction, what we feel when typically we're overwhelmed by our worries. So anxiety, so worry tends to focus on a practical problem. So there's one particular thing, what if this happens? What if this happens? And if that becomes more prolonged, less focused, it may move into anxiety, and where anxiety perhaps becomes disproportionate to the threat that we're worried about. And anxiety can be a diagnosable mental illness. So what we need to do is to, in a sense, help prevent our worries from overwhelming us and leading on to anxiety. And as it says, you can perhaps control or distract yourself to an extent from worrying, whereas anxiety then becomes persistent and has a real impact on daily life. It's sort of all pervading in a way. And worry and stress can be productive, because if there is something that is a concern and you're worried about it, then you can then address it. And indeed, stress will put our bodies on alert so that we can deal with the threats or the worries that we're experiencing. However, it is prolonged stress that may result from the overwhelming worries that can lead to anxiety, and then they can be debilitating, and we'll look at that. So, as I say, worry, stress and anxiety are different, and perhaps understanding those can be helpful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to look at managing stress, because we say that stress is our response to being overwhelmed by worries. And if we can manage the stress, then that will in turn help us just focus in a practical and positive sense on the worries that we have. This may well be something that you've come across before, the stress bucket model. But I think it's such a helpful one that it's worth revisiting in this context of looking at our worries. So stress flows into our bucket, and stress can result from a particular threat. It may be an actual threat, we're going to cut up on the motorway, something like that, or a perceived threat if you have to speak in a meeting perhaps. But stress can also result from being overwhelmed by the worries that you have. And stress can flow into your mind, flow into the bucket, which is your mind here. And stress can then just build up and build up. And if the bucket fills up and then overflows, that's when problems can develop. And it can be the very small thing that is the trigger for our bucket overflowing, as it were, and us just not being able to cope. You lose your car keys, for example, something like that. And when the bucket overflows, in a sense, that perhaps we may lead to anxiety. So what we need to do is we need to manage. We may not be able to affect the worries that we're presented with and the stresses coming in, but what we can therefore try to do in terms of this model is to manage the level of stress and to keep it at a manageable level. And there are positive coping strategies that can help us do that. And we'll look at some of the ways of helping, the tools to help with worry that we'll look at in a short while. There are what we call sort of bad coping, and in a sense those are perhaps just trying to be in a bit of denial about the worries that there are. We may turn to sort of alcohol, we may turn to scrolling our phone, whatever it may be, rather than addressing the stress that is flowing in. We may need to distract ourselves for a little while, but we need then to come back and address this stress, consider these worries, think about how we can address our worries, and then thus manage the level of stress in our mind in this bucket here. So, as we say, healthy coping means the tap is working and then lets the pressure out. But unhealthy coping, being in denial, not addressing the stress, means that the tap isn't working, so that the bucket will fill up and overflow. And just to say how we recognise when the stress is can becoming overwhelming is the fight or flight response that I think we're all aware of. So these are things that help us initially by putting our body on alert and addressing the worry, but we need to make sure that they're not too prolonged. So if you have overwhelmed by worries, you'll have racing thoughts as your mind tries to address the worries that you have. You'll be unable to relax because you're needing to consider the worries and solve the problems. You may feel very irritable because others may be distracting you from addressing the worries that you're trying to sort out. The body, when you're feeling stressed, will release hormones, adrenaline, cortisol, and these can lead into those feelings of feeling a bit sick or a knot in the chest or stomach. Your heart rate will increase in order to pump, get oxygen and pump blood around to the major stomach muscles, and you feel your heart beating faster, more shallow. And again, we say you may feel a bit sick from the hormones that are keeping you alert. The blood will go to the major muscle groups so that you can fight the threat or run away from it as an evolutionary response, so that your extremities may feel, your hands may feel sweaty. And again, in terms of trembling, because we're primed to be able to fight or to run away, and if there's nowhere to go, as it were, we may feel quite sort of trembly as well. And of course, we may feel difficulty sleeping because the worries are keeping us awake. We talked about that. And it may affect us by eating or drinking more or less. So these are the very classic fight or flight responses to stress, and in themselves help us solve a problem, keep us alert. But what we need to care for ourselves and to make sure that stress isn't prolonged, and at the end of a stressful experience, that we can then have a chance to reset and relax our bodies afterwards. So we need to address the worries that we are experiencing. And if we don't, this is a worry cycle that we may be familiar with. So we're worried or something, we may even feel quite panicky about it. It may be that if we don't address them, that we avoid the worry, which can bring us temporary relief, but then it's only temporary, and the worries and the panic, they're at the back of your mind and will come back, and will come back. We can't put them aside forever. We do have to address them if we're going to resolve them. If we don't, then we have a loss of confidence in our ability to cope, and that will cause us a worry in itself. And so the worries become more entrenched and not resolved. So what we need to do is to reverse that cycle and think about the tools that will help us address the worries. So what I'd like to do now for the rest of the session is to think about how we can address these worries that concern us. So, and some of them are really simple, but really quite effective tools. And I'd love to share some of these with you. So the first one is the circle of control. And this just sort of helps us identify the worries that we are experiencing. And, you know, even if you're in the middle of the night, and in a very gentle sense, you can kind of think this through. So essentially, if you're feeling sort of worried, stressed, you can use this circle of control to help look at the concerns. So being a bit mindful and stepping back from the worries that you're experiencing to just identify and think, well, actually, what is it that I am worried about? And the looking first at the circle of concern around the outside, it's the green one, but it's the larger circle around the edge. And this is things that we're worried about, but we can't actually control or influence them. We can't do anything about them. So in a sense, it's acknowledging that, yes, I am worried about this, but actually it's a world issue, perhaps a wider issue. It's under the control of somebody else. And if, you know, in the night or another time, we can, in a sense, almost mentally put that aside and say, I'm genuinely and correctly worried about it, but I can't do anything about it. Let me focus on the things that I can actually do something about. So the middle ring, the red one, the middle one, so this is the circle of influence, and this includes things we can't necessarily control, but we may have some influence over. We may be able to talk to people about what might be happening. We may be able to do something in a small way. So we can't change the situation, but we can actually help make it less of a negative one. We can talk to those who have more control over it. And then the middle circle, the blue one in the center, that's the circle of control. And this includes things over which we have direct control. So, for example, we may not be able to influence some of the things that worry about us, but we may be able to help our own resilience and our well-being, so that it helps us, makes us, in a sense, more resilient. It boosts the positive things in our lives, and it makes us just more able to deal with the stress and the things that are worried about us. So it may be our own responses that we do have a bit more control over, even if we can't control what's actually happening. So stepping aside, thinking about, well, I'm really worried about this thing, but then is it something actually that I don't have any influence over? Can I leave it aside? Is there something I can do about it, even if I can't change it? Or actually, is there something inside myself and my own well-being that I can actually do something about? And that can really help. The second tool is thinking about and just recognizing some unhelpful thinking styles. And these are really classic mind traps that we all fall into. But actually, sometimes if you can just step aside mentally, as it were, and think about one's own thinking, then that can be really helpful, just on understanding what's going on, really. So the first one is a mental filter. And when we notice just the negative or some more critical things instead of the positive, because they don't actually fit through our filter. So apparently when we retain negative thoughts, that can take just microseconds. But if something happens more positively, it takes longer for our brains to retain them. And that's a survival tactic. But what it can be is that it means that we just focus on sort of negative things. You know, if you have a lot of praise for something you've done and one suggestion of something you could do, change to do better, it's the one that we focus on. So it's about stepping aside and recognizing all the positive things that are happening as well. So another one is the sort of compare and despair. So this is when we only see sort of good and positive things in other people, and then we compare ourselves negatively against them. And of course, we don't know about the other person. We're only looking at one aspect that we think they're better than me, or they're more able to do that with me. I'm less good, or I'm less lovely in some way, because that's what we are sort of thinking about. But actually, as we see the other person as a whole person, and we see ourselves as a whole person, we realize that we all have, strengths and weaknesses, and it's helpful just to sort of recognize that too. The third one is around mind reading. And if we are just assuming that others are thinking perhaps negatively about us, but actually we really don't have any evidence for that. And we all, again, something we all do, but actually if you then step back a little and we look at our checking sort of unhelpful thoughts, then we might, when we realize that actually it's not really necessarily correct or fair even to assume that the other person is thinking negatively about us. And then again, such a common thing we all do is actually thinking, well, I should do this or I must do this. And you find yourselves around beginning thoughts saying, well, I really ought to do this, or I really should do that. And just putting pressure on ourselves because we have all these responsibilities, we are caring people. And that leads us to just having these sort of unrealistic expectations. It may be thinking that in your role as whatever your role of responsibility for somebody else, that you ought to be able to do more to help them, for example. But actually, when you realize and step back for a moment, you realize that there is really only so much you can do, and that you're doing and more, and that, you know, that means everything. So sometimes just sort of stepping back and realizing that perhaps you don't have to do everything yourself. It's perfectly good that's to say perhaps sort of no sometimes, and then, you know, just really realizing that actually you're doing so much already, and that there isn't more that you can do. So just stepping back and thinking about our how we're thinking, and sometimes, you know, just being sort of a bit more gentle to ourselves, really, and realizing quite how much pressure we are putting on ourselves. And again, this is a little similar to the circle of control, a worry tree. And again, it doesn't have to be as complicated as it looks, but you're at the bottom of the tree and you notice you're being mindful in noticing that you're getting caught up by the worries that you're experiencing. And if you can step back a little bit from your worry and just identify, what is it about? And then again, just to sort of analyze it a little bit and say, right, well, I'm moving up the tree. Is there something I can do about it? And actually, if the answer is no, it's like the circle of control. There isn't anything I can do about it. It's right to be worried, but I can't do anything. Then if you can try mentally by standing aside a little, put it to one side. If you can do something about it, think, all right, now when can I help? When do I need to do that? And if the answer is now, then rather than just, you know, having it forever on a to-do list, say, all right, what can I do? And what do I need to do? And let's see if I can just put the first step in place and then do that. And then I can put it to one side. I've ticked it off. There's nothing more I can do for the moment. If the answer is I can, yes, but not until later, then if you can actively say, right, that's going to be what I'm going to do then. I'll put a note in my diary, I'll write myself a note, and then you can put the worry to one side in that way. And it sounds simple, and but it really works actually. And again, it's stepping aside from your worry and sort of thinking about it, and seeing it as just something to address, so that it stops being a rather unfocused worry, but actually is something that you've addressed. And then whichever end of the tree you are, you can put it to one side. And again, that can be really helpful. So just to have a little recap on the things and some other thoughts that can help with worry, not tools as such, but just tips really. Schedule worry time. And actually, again, this is something that can work. I am really worried about this, but in fact, something else I need to do right now, and I'm going to worry about it later. I've got a bit of time to think about it later. I'll think about it properly, but I won't let it worry me at the moment. And again, that stepping back, that mindful addressing it can be very, very useful. It can be journaling, and that has, we know that some people have the most amazing journals. They're just sort of wonderful works of art, but actually sometimes just sort of taking something out of your mind, out of your head, as it were, and putting it on paper can be a really powerful thing to do. And it articulates it. There's a little bit of space and distance in thinking about it, having it down on paper. So it really can be quite a powerful way. It doesn't have to be a beautiful journal, but just jotting things down can really help to make the worry a concern to be addressed, rather than just a difficult feeling. I think this is an interesting one. We say sort of practice gratitude, and sometimes, so that's a phrase that's used, and it may feel a little hollow if things are really pretty bleak at any one time. But actually, in terms of our automatic nervous system and how we work, we have our sympathetic system that involves stress and stress response. We have our parasympathetic response that is around rest and digest, and that is the one we want to sort of help to be dominant, to boost it. And if there are things, it may be things that, very small things that you are grateful for, however difficult other things may be, or actually a few things that you've done and done well, or it may be that things that you've put in place, and actually maybe just at the end of a day, thinking about what those are, jotting them down, it just boosts the positive side. The things that sustain us rather than the things that drain us can actually in time build up and be a very positive experience. And again, however one might want to do this, you might want to keep cards where people have put in them how much they value you, how much they care for you and love you and thank you for what you've done. It may be jotting something down, but of the good things and the things you've achieved in some ways. So just to put those negative mind traps, those thoughts in place, and actually to look at the reality, which is that you've done something really well and you're actually really good at things. So to keep the truth and the positive truth. Challenging negative thoughts that come to us, and that is something, again, mindfully we can do, and I've got a very tiny video just to show in just a moment around that. But then overwhelmingly to talk about your worries if you can. They may feel very difficult to talk about, but even if they are things that we feel a bit kind of embarrassed or shamed about, if there is the right person, and it may be thinking about who that person might be to talk to, it can really help, can't it? Again, it's like a journaling, but even more so because you've got somebody thinking about a good listener, somebody who will let you talk through how you feel, will clarify, is interested in, and will help you think through the answers to your own kind of worries. Really important. So thank you. I'd just like to stop sharing for a moment of the presentation. And then I'd like to, at this moment, to share a very short video around, excuse me, I'm just going to make sure I got the sound there, around reframing the unhelpful thoughts that we all have. It's a very short NHS video and around challenging unhelpful thoughts, and very simple, but may well be helpful. So I'm just grateful to show this one to you.
Our thoughts, feelings and behaviours continually affect each other, and it's easy to develop negative patterns where unhelpful thoughts lead to unhelpful feelings and actions. Sometimes this can become a vicious cycle. Many of us don't realise that we can influence this process and that this can improve our mental health. The best way to deal with these unhelpful thoughts is to recognise them, challenge them, and see if you can replace them. Some people call this the catch it, check it, change it approach. With practice, this can help us look at perceived problems from a different perspective. For example, you might be worried about an important task you have to do at work, convinced it will go wrong and everyone will think you're a failure. Rather than immediately accepting this thought and feeling even worse, take a moment to catch it and check it. Ask yourself whether there's good evidence for it, or if there are other explanations. Try thinking about what you would say to a friend who was thinking this way. Finally, see if you can change the thought for a more positive one. Maybe, I'm prepared, I've put a lot of work in, and I'm going to do my best. Sometimes you will be able to change the thought to a positive one, but don't worry when at other times you can't. There are no right or wrong answers. It's about learning to think more flexibly and be more in control. By catching the thought, checking it, and seeing if you can change it, with practice, you can help break the negative cycle.
Thank you. So, as I say, that's an NHS video around challenging those unhelpful thoughts that we have, and they may be ones that we very much feel when we're asleep. So hopefully that is something, again, that's another sort of tool in the box, really. So I'd just like to finish with the last few slides, and I'll just share the presentation again. Oh, sorry, beg your pardon. Just there we go. And just to think about our sleep, because that is often when our the worries we have are difficult for us and come. You're very busy during the day, but it's at night when you can't sleep that the worries come and overwhelm us. It may mean that we can't get to sleep in the first place. It may mean that we wake in the night, can't get back to sleep, or it may mean that we wake very early in the morning and again worried about the day ahead and can't can't sleep. And then, of course, you're worried about being tired. So I'd just like to share just a couple of thoughts around improving sleep, if that's okay. So our sleep cycle, and you may well know all of this, but our sleep cycle is one of the sleep-wake cycle is one of our key body clock sort of rhythms that we have, and it responds quite closely to light and dark. And as it gets dark in the evening and our lights dim, our bodies produce melatonin that make us feel sleepy and keep us asleep in the night. And as we expose ourselves to light in the daytime, then our body releases cortisol which responds to light and keeps us awake. So our bodies want to go to sleep, they want to wake up, and one of the ways is just really to help, if we can, by keeping that routine and more or less going to bed and getting up again, so more or less at the same sorts of times, because our bodies also respect and respond to a routine as well. And then in the evening, if we can avoid the sort of bright lights, that's very helpful. If we can have dim lights, then that will help us feel sleepy. And also our bodies, again, it's around routine, it's around the light, really. And if we can build in wind down time, again, that is extremely helpful, rather than sort of working right up to the wire. And if the lights are dimmer, that's very helpful too, but particularly avoiding the harsh light, blue light from screens, phones and tablets and so forth, is also sort of very helpful. Alcohol and caffeine, or caffeine is a stimulant, and then alcohol, we may go to sleep very quickly, but it affects the quality of our sleep, so we may not feel so refreshed when we wake up in the morning. Ideally, seeing your bed as a kind of place to sleep, as it were, but really rather than work. So again, if just your body just gets used to the routine, and if we can avoid, answering emails, just go to sleep kind of thing, that's all very helpful, and napping later in the day. So those are all things that we can help prepare our bodies to sleep. And then there's what to do, things we can do in the night as well to sort of help us. And mindfulness, just in the sense of looking again at the tools we just looked at today, sort of stepping outside, trying to not just get in the cycles of perhaps unformed worries, but actually just trying to think about them and then put them to one side. There are also lots of mindfulness sort of apps, and exploring those, one that maybe work for you. Some sort of visualization. Sometimes you can visualize your worries as leaves blowing in a breeze, falling off a tree, being caught by a stream, flowing down to a pool to be gathered in the morning. There's lots of different ones, and looking at the different apps is a helpful thing to do. But again, just being very conscious of the worries and being able to lead them to one side as much as one can. Again, a sort of breathing apps, things like that are helpful, concentrating one's breathing, sort of, your body move, all of these things. If you really can't sleep, to get up, do something not exposed to bright lights, but something very gentle, unstimulating, and then trying again later. And avoid clock watching, particularly from a phone, but also that sort of avoiding that anxiety. If I'm really tired, if I don't get to sleep now, I'll not be able to manage tomorrow. At least if you can rest in a sort of relaxed way, that will help. So really, in terms of the worries that we feel at night, I think partly sort of respecting the way one's body wants to work, the light and dark, and that routine of getting used to the sleep-wake cycle. And then if you can't sleep, trying to be calm and mindful, and just trying to kind of rest and relax even if you can't sleep. Easier said than done, but sometimes it's helpful that one can have a little practice and you know, get used to responding to worries in this way. As I say, our bodies are very much geared by routines. I just want to finish before any questions, just touching on some local services and support. And if you are feeling worried, you're feeling very anxious, these are groups and things and people who might help. Some I'm very conscious around Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, but not all. CPSL Mind, we have peer support groups, and we have calm spaces, we have good mood cafes, and although some of those are local, you visit them in person, some are online as well, so you could access them anywhere if you wished. And those you don't need to give any contact details or any notice. You can just arrive and turn up. And on our website, there's the times and days of when those are. If you are local, actually, there's this site called How Are You, H-A-Y, Hey, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. And this is a fantastic website. It's put together by the Mental Health Trust, that kept really up to date by a team. And they list everything in local communities right across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough that boost well-being, activities, get people together, boost well-being. So kind of something for everyone. They're really lovely websites. And similarly, Keep Your Head. Those are information activities more geared specifically around mental health and well-being. Again, if you're local, that's a really nice website too. And then these are sort of national helplines, so can be accessed anywhere. Samaritans, I was one, and I believe very, very firmly in the sort of wonderful service, listening service that they offer. You can phone anytime or email now as well, and somebody who cares, someone who listens, who will help not tell you what to do, but will help just frame your thoughts and step back and just sort of gather yourself. A lovely listening service. If you prefer to text, and that have mental health support that way. Papyrus is prevention for suicide prevention around younger people. And then Calm, similarly, that's web chat and geared support for men, and that can be mental health support for men, can be different and can be difficult, and that's there for you. A couple of other slides as well, just around support. Stayingsafe.net is a most fantastic website around suicide prevention, suicide support awareness. It's absolutely fantastic, and it's international. It's put together by suicide prevention clinicians and respected experts, and it's around keeping people safe, keeping yourself safe, just making it so accessible, so caring, and things that you can do to keep yourself safe or support others. So around suicidal thoughts and feelings, which are very common, it's a lovely website. The NHS sort of talking therapies, and that can be through self-referral or a GP, depending on where you are. And of course, in an emergency, in a mental health crisis emergency, you can phone 999 or go to A&E. Around Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, Lifeline have a mental health helpline, and they also offer suicide bereavement support as well, which is a fantastic service if you've lost someone through suicide. And then again, Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, you can phone NHS 111 and then select the mental health option. It used to be option 2, but now it's they've just asked, it's the mental health option. And it might be that you may, in Cambridge and Peterborough, be referred to CPSL Mind. We have a sanctuary where you can come in person first half of the night, both one in Cambridge and then one in Peterborough if referred by 111. So just around sort of crisis support, around ongoing well-being support, around helplines, people to talk to. There's a wonderful selection of types of support and well-being available, and do consider them or think about them and use them, because they're there and can make a real difference. If one perhaps plucks up a little courage sometimes and just have a look and takes it forward, and there will be someone who cares and is interested, or information there. So just to reflect before we kind of come together for some questions. So I just wanted to say a real thank you for joining me this morning. I really appreciate it. So thank you very much indeed for coming on this session this morning around coping with worries. Coping with worries, having worries and being worried about things and people and the world is part of being human, is part of being people. We are all caring people, and we're all going to have these worries, but sometimes just identifying them, thinking about them, can really help and put them into perspective and address them as well.
Thank you again, Anne. Very much appreciated. Fascinating today, as ever. Thank you again to all of you for attending, and we look forward very much to seeing you the next time. Bye-bye.